And our next speaker is Albert Skip Rizzo. Welcome, Skip. Skip is here from the University of Southern California, and he is the director of, now I need to look at this because this is not something I'm familiar with, a director of medical virtual reality. So I think he's in competition with Anthony for interesting job title. And this work is really amazing. He is conducting research to develop virtual reality systems that are focusing on health problems such as autism, post-traumatic stress disorder and ADHD. So really fantastic work. He's also involved in gerontology, which I looked up and found out is the study of aging. So you're going to be popular, I think. Numerous awards, including the Pioneer in Medicine Award, and we're going to hear a little bit about how virtual reality is going to war. This is really exciting. So great to have Skip here.
All
Thanks.
right, thank you. First off, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here after a 15-hour flight. I actually was so excited about this that I think I'm over my jet lag, but if I stumble a little bit, please excuse me. I'm going to talk about how virtual reality is really a disruptive technology for mental health care. And my background, just so you have an idea where I'm coming from with this, it's not like I just found out about virtual reality 2 years ago and got excited about it. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I worked back from 1986 to 95 actually practicing in brain injury rehabilitation. And around 1990, I started to get really fed up with the level of the rehabilitation tools that we had available to us to help people after a brain injury or a stroke, to recover their cognitive abilities. That was my main area, was cognitive rehab. And so one day I see one of my clients, a 22-year-old male, frontal lobe injury, very hard to motivate, something that's very common with traumatic brain injury. He was very hard to motivate for more than 5 or 10 minutes on a rehab task. And one day I see him sitting under a tree, and he's bent over something. I walk over, I go, "Tim, what are you doing?" And he goes, "It's a new thing, it's a Game Boy." And I watched him, and the first thing I noticed, he was a Tetris warlord. And the second thing I noticed was he was glued to it. And he was motivated and engaged in this activity well beyond anything I could do with him. So light bulb went off. I had a Nintendo NES system, and it had SimCity. I brought that in, and my client started working with that. And if you've never played SimCity, it's a multitasking, executive function kind of training stimulation activity, and it's in a game format. And once they learn the interface is a little clunky and hard to learn on a gamepad, but once they learned it, they were glued to it. And at that point, I started to learn about virtual reality. This was like 92 at the time, and virtual reality was going through its first hype cycle. People were saying all the things that they say now about virtual reality, but they were saying it then. The only problem was the technology sucked. It just wasn't there to deliver on the vision. But we thought, well, it'll get better. And so in 1995, I left my practice and started working at USC. I took a postdoc just so I could make some friends with computer scientists and get access to equipment. And that happened, and in 1996 we set up a lab, and it was right at the start of the nuclear winter of virtual reality. People started to realize the technology was not there. The vision was sound, though. And so from 1996, we just kept our head down, and a crew of people around the world, and people in Australia as well, continued to do this work and built up a literature and an evolutionary technological development applying VR for clinical applications. So what I'm going to do today is walk through some of those things, but then focus on our work treating post-traumatic stress disorder with returning veterans from the Iraq and Afghan conflict. So what I'll try to cover in the brief time I have, quick intro to VR, talk about the development of the exposure therapy system. If I have time, I'll talk about virtual human interaction, and then talk about the future of VR. So this is where I'm from, the Institute for Creative Technologies. We get a lot of funding from the US military. They wanted to have a VR research institute in LA so that they could access the Hollywood talent for special effects and graphics and narrative, storytelling, and simulation. So we're sort of the unholy alliance between Hollywood, the military, and academia. And somehow those three cultures get along in this building. And the lab I direct is the MedVR lab. And over the years, we've developed applications that address psychological, cognitive, and motor functioning in humans. And also, we've started to bring in virtual humans for a variety of applications. So just a quick little video of a couple of these things. We'll see more of this. This is a simulation of Iraq or Afghanistan that we use for exposure therapy for treating PTSD. This is what it looked like 5 years ago. You can see the improvement in the graphics. Technology has evolved. We can thank the game industry for that. But this was, we took the simulation and developed a set of cognitive tests so we could test attention, memory, executive function within an interactive, immersive simulation. We also do, of course, civilian work. This is from 1997, a very early visual spatial training tool for mental rotation. And if you're wearing the glasses, it's like holograms floating in space that you can manipulate and interact with. This is a virtual classroom. This is what a child sees in a virtual reality headset as they look around. And we developed this for assessing children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So child has to pay attention to the stimuli on the board or what the teacher is saying. Meanwhile, knock on the door, the teacher goes and answers. Somebody just threw a paper airplane, school bus going by. So we could just essentially assess a child's attention in a functionally relevant environment where we can control all the elements of what's going on in terms of distraction and the cognitive load of the task and so on. We also developed a series of post-stroke and TBI physical therapy applications so that this is a user being tracked with no wires, no instrumentation, being tracked with a camera, the Microsoft Kinect, and her movement in 3D space is being imparted onto that character, and we can start to build game-like simulations that allow people to get engaged in their therapy, like my former client with the first Game Boy. And this is all off-the-shelf equipment that you could put in someone's home so that you can maximize the amount of time they can spend doing rehab, but hopefully in a way that is fun and engaging. Take that same technology now, and the Cerebral Palsy Foundation wanted us to make ways that children could interact, children with cerebral palsy with really impaired motor function, but to get ways for them to interact with computer games, not for rehab, just so they could participate like their peers do. And here's an example of that. We developed software where we can specify specific movements and impart that into the controls of the game so that the child can now, with whatever motor activity they can control, they can interact. And what you'll see is a little girl playing her first video game ever. And a very simple video game. Her preserved skill was that arm raising. She could do that. So we just simply imparted that into the control to make the shark jump out of the water and catch helicopters and fish and so on. Now Microsoft is adopting this, and we're going to start actually building these things so that you can interact with any Xbox game, no matter what your level of disability, using whatever preserved functioning. So you could play the racing game Forza simply by leaning forward to accelerate, lean back to stop, tilt your head or move your eyes to be able to steer the vehicle. Not about rehab so much, but just about enhancing participation. Finally, the virtual human work. You're probably wondering, how does virtual humans fit in with this? But here's an example of a virtual patient that we developed for training novice clinicians. Essentially, this is a social worker, and he can screw up a bunch with a digital patient before he gets his hands on a live one.
Good afternoon, Sergeant Castilla. What brings you in today?
Well, my wife told me she thought I should talk to someone. She's been pretty concerned about me since a soldier suicided on base last week.
Did you happen to know the soldier?
Yes. He wasn't a friend, but I met the Marine once or twice. He seemed normal at the time.
So, interest of time, you get the idea, a whole Q&A, practice dealing with issues, in this case suicide.
Do you have any plans to hurt yourself?
No. It certainly crossed my mind, especially lately. I
And
just need it all to
finally,
stop.
this is an online intelligent agent that's a healthcare support agent, so that people that come back, veteran service members, hesitant to go talk to a live provider. Nobody likes to go to the doctor, especially when, you know, it's a psychological issue. It's not like, you know, nobody likes to go to the dentist, but when they have a bad toothache, they eventually go. People suffer, and the stigma of seeking mental health, well, you can go online and interact with this guy and find out about PTSD, take some light self-assessment, get a little bit of advice. If I have time, I'll show a little more of them, but I'll let you just get introduced to him now.
Well, I'm not a real person, if that's what you're asking, but I'm based on the personality and experiences of real soldiers and Marines. I'm still just a piece of software, but I'm getting better all the time, so hopefully I can be a helpful piece of software to talk to.
So that's Bill Ford, we name our characters. So what is VR? You know, a strictly technological definition, combination of technologies, computers, sensing, tracking, human interface devices, graphic rendering, sensory displays, all to create simulations that people can interact with. I prefer the more human-centric, more human-computer interaction definition because it brings it down to the basics that we can interact with computers in a more naturalistic way. And if we look at you know, the history of computing, we're not limited to hunting and pecking on a keyboard to take advantage of the power we have in these little boxes now. We can interact in a natural way in perhaps the simulation of a relevant space. The best metaphor in mental health and rehabilitation is aviation simulation. So just as an aircraft simulator would test and train piloting ability, we can build virtual reality simulations that assess, rehabilitate, test, train, treat human functioning. And in some sense, for any psychologists out there, it's the ultimate Skinner box, the ultimate way to put somebody in a controlled stimulus environment and either measure their behavior or try to change it in a positive way. Now, a lot of times people talk about the 3 I's of virtual reality: immersion, interaction, and imagination. We'll take the first 2 real quick. Immersion, so putting somebody in a simulation. As you see this service member wearing a headset, as he turns his head in this marketplace in Iraq, what you're seeing is what he sees in the simulation. So he's immersed in an environment. But VR isn't just about immersion. Interactivity is key. So again, in the rehab context, you don't need to be immersed in this environment. There's a woman doing a balance training exercise where her movement's imparted to this penguin. And again, she leans forward, it goes fast, leans side to side to drive it, back to slow down, and so forth. But also, with the virtual human work, here's one that we did for job interview training for high-functioning autism. These are a lot of folks out there that can do a job, they have the intellect and the capability, they just are scared crapless to go through an interview, and they don't have great skills at that. So we've set it up so we built a variety of characters, and you can set the characters at different levels of provocativeness, soft touch, neutral, stress interviewer. Here's one of the nicer interviewers.
I'm glad you're here. In a minute, we'll get into some questions about the job. But before we do, why don't you just tell me about yourself?
Oh, well, thank you. And then for a point of comparison,
This is an entry-level position. I guarantee there will be things you won't like about this job. That said, what's the most important thing you think you're looking for in a job?
not working with you. Anyway, Myron Kruger, one of the early godfathers, and again, the early vision, people were saying this in 1993, we're going beyond automating paradigms of the past, creating new ones that leverage either immersion, interactivity, or a combination of the two things. And so he's somebody I idolize. I always include his slide in all my talks, and we get people up and moving around. Now, I could do a whole talk on what VR brings to the table in terms of, you know, all clinical applications, education as well, putting people in relevant environments, controlling stimuli, measuring behavior, all that good stuff. But I can't talk about that today. If you want to read an article about it, you can get my email and I'll send you this piece. It goes into it in over detail. So let's take a look at the past and see where we are now. In 1994, VR first was applied clinically for exposure therapy for people with simple phobias, fear of heights, flying, spiders, and so forth. And since that time, this is a short list of the areas where VR has been usefully applied for either assessment, rehabilitation, or scientific study of these various health conditions. Now, in the beginning, exposure therapy. And it's a basic process or behavioral process where you help somebody to confront what they fear, but in a safe environment. So you can get a person that would never get on an airplane, but they'll go on a virtual airplane, and you gradually expose them to things like that, and over time they improve. So, basic behavioral change with repeated exposure, and it was applied, it continues to be applied over the last 20 years in these areas. And here's an example from 1997. If you had claustrophobia and you were in Spain, they'd put you in this room and close the door and then gradually move the wall in on you. They built elevators and tight hallway spaces and compressed rooms with a lot of people and so on. The technology has improved radically in terms of how it looks. So fear of flying, whole set of scenarios for that. Social phobia, actually addiction practice, getting people to practice their drug refusal skills in social settings with virtual people and so on. The technology's evolved, but all the pretty pictures don't matter for nothing unless you have data to support that it adds value. And our group and another group published these meta-analyses back in 2008, I think, where we both came to the same conclusion. VR outperformed the traditional method where it was imagination-only guided imagery and was as good as in vivo exposure, if you could actually get a patient to get on an airplane with a little support and so on, or hang out at the airport, which you couldn't do so well, or go up a glass elevator if it was fear of heights. So we've got an evolved database on our side to support the use of VR for anxiety disorders like simple phobia. So the high end of the anxiety disorder spectrum, post-traumatic stress disorder. And we believe that a similar process, and it's been born in the literature, can help people that suffer from post-traumatic stress. The repeated exposure, confrontation, and processing of difficult emotional memories. And in 2008, after you saw the data on problems we have in the United States with our service members, the Institute of Medicine did a review of all the treatments, and the bad news, a lot of them don't work. The good news, though, was this kind of hard medicine for a hard problem, trauma-focused therapy, does have evidence to support its value, and it's an evidence-based approach. So what we decided was, well, why use VR to do this? It's already evidence-based. Well, it's not 100%, and some people avoid going into treatment, some people aren't successful. So what if we can engage them in VR simulations that resemble what they were traumatized by? And that's where the work has taken off from. And here's a little clip that describes it a little bit.
BraveMind is a form of virtual reality exposure therapy that combines video game-based simulations with one of the most widely used evidence-based therapies. Making use of the University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technology's expertise in immersive technologies and emotional storytelling, BraveMind is a treatment option with appeal for today's digital generation. BraveMind gradually recreates trauma-relevant scenarios that clinicians can use to help patients confront and process difficult memories in a
clinician is
safe and supportive
controlling
environment.
what goes on in the simulation. So it's not a self-help tool, it's not an automatic tool, it's a customizable, tailored set of worlds that a clinician, it's a tool. It's not a replacement for a clinician. A clinician controls all the aspects of the simulation in real time as the user is going through it to try to mimic and resemble as much as possible the scenarios in which they were traumatized and to help them to confront and process. Now, this began very humbly by taking a game in 2003, Full Spectrum Warrior, and essentially stealing the street right here out of it, and this is what it looked like. First prototype, no funding, just nights and weekends with a couple of programmers. And, add a little sound, and the clinician in this phase could hit a button on the keyboard, make some gunfire, have a helicopter come down. A very basic program. But it was the only way that we could get funding. We had to build a prototype to kind of show the concept, because otherwise it sounds like, oh, we're trying to build a holodeck Star Trek. Isn't that a couple centuries away? So we built that. I'm very fortunate, Greg Rieger, a former grad student, had done his work with VR pain distraction for his dissertation, went to Iraq as a combat operational stress control team officer and brought a system with him. So this is a guy in Iraq, in virtual Iraq, and it was all about just getting us feedback, because you can't build this stuff from the ivory tower of imagination. You have to have good user input right from the get-go. So he went there, and when he got redeployed home, he continued the work and got us great feedback about all the stuff we got wrong and stuff that, you know, works pretty well. And we evolved the system, and we've gone through a couple of large iterations, but this is what it looks like now. 14 different worlds that represent Afghan villages, marketplace, deserts, mountain outposts. Clinician can make things happen, all around the patient narrating their trauma experience.
By going through it there, it's not going through my head at night when I'm trying to sleep, or when I'm with my wife, when times when I don't want it to come up and me start thinking about it. Traumatic things are not normal. You cannot handle the things that you've seen and done. And this is a tool that has helped me out tremendously.
Reliving the worst moments of his life has helped him to move on with his life.
I'm probably about 80% of who I was before I left, but I think that's pretty good after seeing and doing the things that we've done.
For Nightline, this is Dan Harris in Atlanta.
So, sorry about that. Let's talk real quick about data. I don't want to bore you with too much of it, but in one of the early clinical trials, first 20 treatment completers, average age 28, multiple deployments, 8 years in the military, had tried some form of evidence-based treatment before with no clinical benefit. That's who we got. And that's the red is the pre-treatment symptom ratings, post, and 3-month follow-up. To put a finer point on it, 16 of the first 20 to go through it no longer met criteria for PTS, and 4 did not benefit. The studies that followed, oh, this is actually anxiety and depression scores, same pattern. Others followed with replications of the data. This is one that came out a couple of years ago, comparing it with the traditional prolonged exposure approach. It's a small N study. I don't really trust that, because usually prolonged exposure does much better. It showed actually no improvement whatsoever, but the VR did. And since that time, we've done a lot of studies, a lot of ongoing work going with it. But you know, I don't care if we beat the old school method. I'm more concerned about providing treatment options for a digital generation of service members. And the idea of maybe making treatment something that might appeal to service members who are hesitant to seek care. Maybe this might be a tool that minimizes the stigma and gets people engaged in treatment that might not ordinarily go to traditional talk therapy, face-to-face therapy, even though all that talk therapy stuff goes on while you're doing this. It's not just VR. So after we built that, we realized along the way, we were building simulations. There was a ton of stuff we could do, different clinical trials, different traumatic brain injury studies, fMRI studies, using it as an assessment tool. We built out a system for the Canadian military. We changed the vehicles, the uniforms. Anytime we had a camel in the desert, we put a moose out there. No, just kidding. But we decided to take on something very touchy and very difficult, and that is to address the challenge of military sexual trauma, which is a real big issue in the U.S. military. And as militaries become bi-gender, it may be a bigger issue. So we built a set of simulations that are being tested out, and bigger challenge than combat related. You've got to create simulation. We're not creating digital sexual assaults here. We're creating context, drawing on situations, and mainly civilian simulations, because Most sexual trauma in the military doesn't occur in the trenches of Afghanistan. It happens on bases in the United States. So here we have a character that can follow you around, can pop up, perpetrator character, whole variety of different spaces that we can put people in, all with the aim of helping them to confront very difficult and challenging memories, but in a supportive, safe clinical environment. And that study now is ongoing. Barbara Rothbaum, our collaborator at Emory, is running that clinical trial. So what have we learned about VR and post-traumatic stress? We know VR we can use safely. It doesn't re-traumatize people. It's VR exposure therapy. It's not VR therapy. We're very clear. Anything we do with VR, we're taking an evidence-based approach already and trying to deliver it in a more systematic, controllable, and engaging fashion. More effective than imaginal with anxiety, as effective as in vivo. Doesn't have to be an exact replica. People suspend disbeliefs. It's a tool to extend the skills of a well-trained clinician, and we're hoping that if successful, particularly with this military sexual trauma work, maybe we can translate that to civilians and start really addressing, the real challenges that we face with firefighters, police officers, sexual trauma victims, abused children, and so forth, applying this approach. What about intelligent virtual human agents? I'm just going to show a couple of quick things, and then we'll finish up with the future of VR. Over the years, we've developed a wide range of virtual human things, particularly for the military. They wanted things for training. I'm sorry, this slideshow has a mind of its own. And a variety of different applications. And then we got involved with using it for virtual patient studies, and also what I'm going to show next is the SimCoach project, the fellow you met earlier. And I'm going to show a little video, it'll run about 2-3 minutes, designed to engage folks online to maybe be a toe in the water that might give them the information about what they're going through. And let me explain.
The name's William Ford, but you can call me Bill. Welcome to SimCoach.
Hi, Bill. So what's SimCoach?
SimCoach is a safe place for warfighters and their families to talk about the things that are on their minds.
So, who are you?
I'm a virtual human, which means that I'm based on the real experiences and personalities of actual warfighters and their families. Anyway, I'm here to listen, and I'm here to help. Anything you want to talk about?
Talk to you? How do I do that?
Well, you're doing it right now. Just type in regular English. Anything troubling you?
If there is, why would I want to talk to you about it?
Well, here, I'll tell you what. I made a video that tells you a little bit more. I'm going to pop it up over here on the right. Not all the wounds of war are physical. When you don't dress a wound, it gets worse, doesn't it? SimCoach is here to talk about the issues weighing on your mind without worrying about anyone finding out about it. You start off by choosing the SimCoach that's right for you.
Oh, hi. Hope you weren't waiting long. Welcome to SimCoach. I'm Ellie.
Then just type in English. Ellie can listen, understand, and respond.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a few questions so I can figure out how to help you better. Is that okay? Everything you say here is completely anonymous, and we've taken a lot of steps to keep it that way. If you don't mind my asking, how's your sleeping been lately? Here's a link on the do's and don'ts of good sleep hygiene.
Ellie can send you links to resources, show you a video, administer questionnaires, give you advice, or just tell you a story.
So my younger brother Alex was in the Marines and deployed twice. I don't want to say I know what he went through, because I don't. But something he said kind of reminded me of something you might be going through.
But the most important thing she'll do is listen to yours.
That must have been really rough. Go ahead and tell me more about that, if you can.
SimCoach was developed by a whole group of docs, computer geeks, experts, and writers to be as helpful as possible. And the more the people use it, the better it's getting, all the time. SimCoach, a safe place to talk to someone at a time when it's needed most.
So the big development in this area now is we built a toolkit so you can go online and author SimCoaches. We built the architecture and the toolkit, and it's being used for a variety of other purposes. The architecture is pretty stable now, and so we're evolving that, and that's also driven the development of our job interview training and also the new virtual patient toolkit. We're really about putting the tools in the hands of, you know, the experts that are out there that can begin to select patients, can begin to author dialogue, and now the other advancement is voice recognition has gotten better, so we're not limited to a text box any longer for interacting with these characters. You can talk naturally, and voice recognition is good. Now the challenge is getting the natural language processing to understand the voice to text and select the best type of response for whatever the aim is. And I think we'll see a lot more of this as we move along. The library of our characters, and each one of those you can make thin, medium size, or larger. So a lot of characters to pick from, and anyway. So finally, imagination. That was what I left out earlier. And Palmer Luckey on the cover of Time magazine. Palmer, very imaginative person, realized that head-mounted displays up until this last year or two really were bad, and they could be better. And the technology drivers were there. Cell phone displays, inertial tracking, all these things had evolved, and there's no reason why we couldn't have a comfortable head-mounted display that could be at a low cost and could really drive the field, which it has. And other companies now are jumping on the bandwagon and have been and are competing. The Samsung Gear just announced that their system will be $99, run on any Android phone. If you go up on Kickstarter or other places, you'll see all kinds of innovation and imaginative efforts to create ways to interact with VR that people never put the effort into before, because, you know, VR was a failed technology, or was thought to be. Finally, the technology has caught up with the vision. So, you know, we're seeing now a preponderance of mental health and relaxation and mindfulness companies coming out of the woodwork and trying to do productizing this stuff. So we're seeing that grow. We're also seeing it being 1994 all over again. You know, back, that was one of my first VR conferences, Meckler Media's VR 94, and it was the 5th one. So from 89 to 94, it was going strong, and 95 was the last one, and then, you know, nuclear winter began. But now it's starting up again. And it's not just something like that, but, you know, there's meetups all over the country in the United States where people gather to find out what's going on. I mean, this is a line, a panoramic image I took of the line to get in, and some of the displays and the people there. You know, even a guy going outside to have a smoke wearing a head-mounted display there, you know? I mean, anyway. So the vision, putting people in environments, you know, that was a sound vision. But, you know, along the way, you know, things got a little bit messed up. And even in 2006. But now when you have Qantas Airlines handing out Gear VRs for first-class passengers to watch movies and engage in compelling panoramic video, spherical video, VR environments, maybe we're finally almost there. So anyway, last thing, older people like VR as well. It's not just for the young.
It's so real. Oh my God, it looks like my backyard, my yard with the snow. Oh, Lord in heaven. How they ever can create this. You know what? I'm hanging onto the sink because I'm afraid I'm going to fall down the cliff. Hey, honest to God. You feel like, oh, if you step off, you're going to fall right in there. Holy mackerel.
This was 3 in the morning. Went to Connecticut to visit my mom, and my flight was delayed, and I just got the gear, and I go, Mom, before you go to bed, you gotta try it. So I got her the next day when she was a little more awake.
Hey, Mom,
asked her a couple questions.
Tell me about your experience with the Samsung Gear VR.
Oh, wow, I'll tell you, it was mind-blowing. I never saw anything like it in my life.
She had one more message. I usually play this when I'm pitching to funders.
If you're watching this, please fund my son's research.
That's a good mom. The future, my last slide, don't worry, future, new century at hand, fast-spreading technology, going to change society forever, you know, all that stuff. I think it's a good vision, and I think if we use it for good, it's going to be a great vision. That's actually a quote from an article about the telephone from 1898. But if we look at what simple audio communication changed society, how it did, think about where we're at now. So thank you, and if anybody wants a copy of this talk, I'll be loading it up on a downloadable site and making it freely available.
Thank you.
Thank you.